Today's Rambam is in Hilchos Maaser-Sheni. And we will, starting Perek Tes Halacha Aleph, we're going to discuss, and eventually in Hilchos Maaser-Sheni. Perek Tes Halacha Aleph, the Rambam says that Neta Ravai. Now there's Orlo, which is the first 3 years, followed by Neta Ravai. And it says Neta Ravai Harehu Kodesh, which needs beer. Why the Rambam starts off. He's middle of Hilchos Maaser-Sheni, Neta Ravai. He doesn't say that anywhere else. Maaser-Sheni doesn't tell us that it's a Kodesh. It's obvious that from the halachas that it's Kodesh. And you know, he talks about halachas that indicate that it's Kodesh. Shenamar ubashana haravius you call period Kodesh hilulam lashem. And then the dinoi, the halacha of it is le'achal b'Yerushalayim leba'olam b'Maaser-Sheni. Now, again, the Rambam writes clearly. There is immediately something to note that he separates the fact to the din. That's not the way he writes it by Maaser-Sheni. That's not the way he writes it by other places. Now, here it throws in a halacha, which l'cheira didn't belong right here, but Yishem she'ein Maaser-Sheni b'Surya, kach ein Neta Ravai b'Surya. So here he's trying to compare the two, Maaser-Sheni and Neta Ravai. Now, just a note, why these halachas here? So the Radvaz tells us that since it's similar to Maaser-Sheni and we're dealing with Maaser-Sheni, we threw in the Rambam threw in Neta Ravai. So I guess he's comparing that. Also, according to some, this is the source of why Maaser-Sheni and then Neta Ravai is not in Surya, and we're going to see later regarding Chutz-Laaretz. And then he says something which to me is like, again, reading it sounds so strange and so uncharacteristic of the way he writes. This is a pasuk in Parshas Nosai, and it is a pasuk that needs explanation because it doesn't tell you. It's like in the middle of nowhere. I mean, when I say in the middle of nowhere, that comes in and not talking about Neta Ravai, and not talking about Maaser-Sheni, not talking about anything of that nature. But it says a pasuk, so the Rambam says, there is nowhere in Kodesh where it hasn't been explained who it belongs to, except for Neta Ravai. In other words, that's why this pasuk is talking about Neta Ravai, and it tells you, so what? Where does the Rambam ever get involved in telling you such a thing? Okay, just one more halacha, even though it sounds like totally out of, not negate to this, but it is, because we'll see soon. About an halacha vav, he writes that it seems to say that Neta Ravai is noyig even in Shemitah. So he seems to say that Neta Ravai is noyig in Shemitah. Now, just to note that Maaser-Sheni is not. So what's the difference? Before he said that it's the same halacha. It's not my question. In fact, the question. In Hilchos Macholais Asuros, Perek Yud halacha tesvav, which we already learned. The Rambam writes, Yeroeli, I believe, she'ein din Neta Ravai noyeg b'Chutz-Laaretz, that Neta Ravai is not in Chutz-Laaretz. Ela oichel peiros shana revius, he eats those fruits of the 4th year, because that's the after Orlo of 3 years is the 4th year. Below pigeon cloud without any opinion. Shaloi Amru, they never said Ela Ha'arla. Who didn't say it? Who are we talking about? Who's the they? And then he goes into all that richas, which is really, I mean, again, I'm not going to get into that even because it takes us into a complicated area. And we don't have the time for that. And it needs a whole new area of explanation. But nevertheless, assuming that he means the rice is really be complicated, unless he's going on the Rabbanon, the Kavachayma, Advar, Masur Yishu, he Chayevas, the Maisus, and Mishriz, with the Reim, Aina Chayevas, and after the Raik, which is Bab, Hilchas, Maaser-Sheni, Chutz-Laaretz, like Kol Shekeh. Okay. Then he brings the Goinim, but he makes like Goinim, Shekam, Levai, Levad, they played nice in the Chutz-Laaretz. And the Rambam writes, Ein L'Dav Zeika. I don't believe that. In Shulchan Aruch, Hilchos Orlo, Simaresh Tzadik Dalid, Siv Zayin brings both shittas. Writes, Din Netter Revain Neig Av Chutz-Laaretz. That's one opinion. V'yasher Shem Shein Neig El Baretz. It's a Rambam. Ava Chutz-Laaretz Peres Habayim Acha She'av Shnei Orlo Mutarim B'Lipid. What's the machlekes? That's what we're going to talk about. The Kesher Mishneh, on the Rambam in Hilchis Macholis Isuras, says that the Ran brings from Yerushalmi and proves that this is the halachas like the Ran. And the Rashba explains, says the Kesher Mishneh, that since the Gemara learns that there's some kind of Gzer Shava from Netter Ravai to Maaser-Sheni, so we learn Kedesh. And therefore he says that just like Maaser-Sheni is not knowing Chutz-Laaretz, Ravai is not knowing Chutz-Laaretz. However, he writes, Harabi Rabbeinu Yena, Harashba, V'Harash, in Periketz and Ravarchim, Chilkin on the Rabbein. They argue on the Rambam. And they say that even a Chutz-Laaretz Netter Ravai is Nayeg, but they write it's only in Kerem, not in Ilona, so that's an issue for itself. What is the Yerushalmi? Yerushalmi, I mean, there's a couple of Yerushalmis, but the one of the Yerushalmi, Perek Zayin Halacha Hey in Peah, writes, Leilomdu Netter Ravai Elam Maaser-Sheni. You learn Netter Ravai from Maaser-Sheni. As it says, so just like Maaser-Sheni is not in Shemitah, so to Netter Ravai is not in Shemitah. That's one piece of Yerushalmi. A few lines later, Rabbi Yehuda says that you didn't learn that the reason that you learn Netter Ravai from Maaser-Sheni, just like Maaser-Sheni is not in Surya, Netter Ravai is not in Surya. So that brings out the question as before that the Rambam seems to differentiate. Obviously, he does not hold one of these things. He says that Shemitah does have Netter Ravai, but not Surya or Chutz-Laaretz. Now, let's go to Orlo, which precedes Shemitah. Is Orlo Noyeg and Chutz-Laaretz? So it's not so pleasant because the pasuk says Meshra Seichem. So the Gemara Kedusha of Lamed Ches says, Nan Hosom, HaChodosh Osur Min HaTorah B'chol Makom. Chodosh is also everywhere. Orlo is also usher in Chutz-Laaretz, halacha. And Aklayim is only Midivrei Seif. My halacha. So one opinion holds halacha Medina, Hilchas Medina, Ulama Rabbi halacha l'Moshe. Okay. So what that seems to say, and which we're going to see soon the Rambam on this, that our law in Chutz-Laaretz is usher. It's had halacha l'Moshe. The levush Simaresh Tzadik Dalet there, and that, as we mentioned before, with the Mechaber brings the halacha. So the levush writes that Ravai is also in Chutz-Laaretz. Why? Because since Orlo is Noyeg Me'alacha L'Moshe Sinai, as he's going to explain, so Ravai is also Noyeg. Now he writes an interesting line. The Ho Talmud. The one is dependent on the other. the whole mokim she'orlo noig am Revai noig. As we're going to get to that. But basically what he says, if there's Orlo, there should be Revai, because Revai is the natural following of Orlo. And then he says, which is the Ava Bisha Orlo Noig Chutz-Laaretz, Ma'alocha, from Alocha Maaser-Sheni, Revai ain't a Noig. And he says, why? Because he learned that from Maaser-Sheni. He says Maaser-Sheni is not Noig Chutz-Laaretz, because it's Chavis Karka, and anything that's Chavis Karka. So too, Revai is not Noig Chutz-Laaretz. So according to him, those who argue in the Rambam is because they say if Orlo is Noig, Levi is Noig. And the Rambam holds that even though Orlo is Noig, you learn out from this way he explains. You learn it out from Kodesh Kodesh and Maaser-Sheni. Okay. We'll get to more understanding of this. The Rambam, Perik Yud, the next Perik that we're learning in Hilchos Maaser-Sheni, Alocha Aleph writes a very interesting losh. Kol shehu chayiv ba'orlo yesh loy revai. The Chaim Mabedayik, and it's a deal that's bailit in the Rambam. What does it mean yesh loy revai? Kol shehu chayiv ba'orlo chayiv revai. Yesh loy revai. Okay. What's that? The Rambam schemes to say that Orlo and Revai go hand in hand. And then he writes, so here he does use the Lo Chayiv. So somehow that lotion changes. And he says, in other words, so it seems to me that the Rambam holds that Orlo and Revai go hand in hand. So what's going on up here? Reb Chaim in Hilchos Macholos Hasuros has an unbelievable, beautiful piece, and he has a Hakira that when the Torah is mechadish, the idea that there is Orlo in Chutz-Laaretz, Alocha l'Moshe Sinai. There is a major difference between the Orlo in Chutz-Laaretz and in Eretz Yisroel. The halacha is that Orlo's Chutz-Laaretz, if it's a suffix, it's mutter. Orlo's Eretz Yisroel, suffix is us. The Rambam himself, in our Perik Halacha Chaf Aleph, writes, "V'oichel kazayis v'tevel shel devreim and b'klai kerem v'orlo shel Chutz-Laaretz v'makanais and makas mardes." He says he got makas mardes, but then he writes, I'm sorry, Halacha Tessin Yud. Orlo keitzad kol anitei hila Michael kol beir shaisais nilan shal shonim mishanot harei and asur b'achila v'ano. Right? And then he has a mad varman Eretz Yisroel. Aval isa Orlo b'Chutz-Laaretz Alocha l'Moshe Sinai shavadai Orlo b'Chutz-Laaretz asur sveika muter. So we see clearly, and the Rambam holds in the pasuk ki savayu al haaretz is not Chutz-Laaretz, but there's a Alocha l'Moshe Sinai, but he says it in a strange way. Alocha l'Moshe Sinai is that sveika muter. Not because the Gemara says it, that's the way it was said. Chaim comes along on Selix. The shaila between the Goinim and the Rambam is whether we say that when the Torah, when the Halacha Meshusina came along and said that there is Orlo, does that mean now that the Halacha Meshusina is saying Orlo is in Chutz-Laaretz is now part of the mitzvah, the chiyuv of Orlo and the Torah, or no, it's a new din. Orlo and Chutz-Laaretz is a new halacha, not part of the Torah halacha. It's a new halacha. So he wants to say that the Rambam holds it's a totally new halacha. Because the Rambam is saying that it's only halacha meshesina, and that's what it means. Shalai amru ella ha'arla. They only said Orlo, meaning in Chutz-Laaretz, it's all the halacha meshesina said. There's no Rabbi. It's not because of Maaser-Sheni, according to this. I'm not learning from Maaser-Sheni because it's not because of Maaser-Sheni, because there's no halacha meshesina. And minat Chutz-Laaretz, only Eretz Yisroel. The halacha meshesina says Orlo's Chutz-Laaretz. That halacha meshesina spoke about Orlo. It didn't speak about. It didn't speak about Net Rabbi. So where do we get Net Rabbi? Chutz-Laaretz does not include Net Rabbi. Does not include Chutz-Laaretz. The Goyim, on the other hand, hold that it becomes part of the rice. The halacha meshesina said, even though the Torah says this is what it means. Everything becomes us. So yeah. And that's the shayla, because the Goyim, it's interesting. You bring the shiltas from Achoy Goyim, and also the Bahag. They write that the shiltas of Achoy Goyim, the Noga Orlo Baritz, Hachi Noga B'Chutz-Laaretz, Hilchas Gemir Le, it says Chesavayu Zman Bia. It's touching up the pasuk. Allah is touching up the pasuk. But there's a different sveik of Ador. Just a note as a side point. We all know that the Rambam holds that every suffix that I say is minateri lekula. So what's this halacha meshesina? It's a kasha in the Rambam. So the answer is a simple answer. The Rambam is talking about a suffix that's a suffix shokul. It's a legitimate, doubt in our minds. It's not just not sure. By Orlo, it has to be sure. It has to be vadai. Any doubt, which logically would say, but it's noitel chumra. Here, there's not even minatera, because it's not a real strong doubt. Here, by Orlo, gone. Okay. So basically, that comes out, according to his logic, that the only way that Rambam can disagree, that the Rambam holds, because he holds that it's has nothing to do with the Torah. It's a new halacha meshesina, and the halacha meshesina says that it's only on Orlo. Now there's no halacha meshesina on that Torah. The only problem is, how does the Rambam make a blanket statement okay? How does the Rambam make a blanket statement that kol shechayiv be'orlo yesh lo l'rabbi? Why would he say that? Second, the Rambam doesn't say that there's halacha l'meshesina on Orlo. The Rambam says halacha l'meshesina is the way it was said that suffix is good. That's what the Rambam says. According to him, the stress should have been, it's only halacha l'meshesina. That would have been the main stress. Why is that a tuffle? That should be the main thing. It's not a strong question, but it's hard. But I also want to say that perhaps, and this is what I want to add to here, that perhaps you can explain the Rambam according to both approaches. Whether we say it's a separate halacha, or whether we say it is it's part of the same mitzvah, and yet there won't be Rabbi. So in order to do that, let's take a look at how the Rambam postures the mitzvah of Net Rabbi. First of all, the Hagdama, he writes the Hilchas Maaser-Sheni, where he brings the mitzvahs. He writes two mitzvahs. One of the two mitzvahs, lahafrish Maaser-Sheni, to separate Maaser-Sheni. Then he writes liyos Net Rabbi kulei kodesh. That's the mitzvah. It should be kodesh. V'dina, again, the same thing over there. That's all the same properties of Maaser-Sheni. But it's dinoi. The Minyan HaMitzvahs, he writes also, Lias Netter Rai Kodesh, that's it. Whereas by Maaser-Sheni, he writes, you separate it in order to eat it Yerushalayim. No, there seems to be a stress on the Kodesh. And also, here, Netter Rai, hey, you Kodesh. V'dina, same thing. There seems to be that point. And then, what is this whole thing? V'ishis Kedosh of Lo Yiyu. What does he bring it there? What's he want? The emes is that the Ishus Kadosh of Lo Yiyu is a medrash. So it's a Yalkut Shemeni Pashas Nosai. Asks on the pasuk Loma Nema. What is this pasuk talking about? Middle of talking about Isha Simumal. What's no, I'm sorry, if a person is my old man, it's like, what's going on here? Since it says on the fourth year that it should be Kodesh, we don't know. Kodesh who? Kodesh L'mayim or Kodesh L'Kliyanim? So it says, this is Kodesh of La'iyu, B'neter Ravai, HaKosam Adam Shiyu Shabayla. Divi Rab Meir. Rabbi Shmuel says, we don't know. So you learn out from Maaser-Sheni. It's also called Kodesh. It's called Kodesh, so therefore you learn out. So why did the Rambam get involved there? What's the gay? Why is he? What's the negate? The halacha is the same. Doesn't matter. What difference does it make? He has a Shmuel's limud. So we said that Advaz explains why he brings Hilchas Netter Ravai over here, because it's similar to Maaser-Sheni. But why is he focused on Hilchas Orlo here? What is Orlo doing here? Orlo should be in Hilchas Masalas Asuras. Like he mentions it there, but here it is where all the details are. Why? Should bring it there. Okay, you don't want to write twice. There's got to be more. And then the lashon of the halacha Moshe Sinai is hard to understand, which is the Gemara's lashon. That's the lashon. Okay, I saw in Achreinim an interesting shaila. They try to understand Orlo Netter Ravai. It's two mitzvahs. Is there a real connection? Now the Rambam says Kol Sheyeshlei Orlo Kol. That has Orlo Yeshlei Ravai. It has Ravai, which we're trying to understand also what that means. So I would like to suggest that Netter of Hegdish, Kodesh doesn't happen by itself. There is a Pa'ula that creates Kedusha. Even by B'chari, the Ram uses Lahafrish B'chari, but there's a Leda that creates the Kedusha. There are things that make it Kaddish. By Maaser-Sheni, the Hafrosha makes it Kaddish. How did suddenly a Peri become Kaddish? So I think that the Rambam's understanding of this Kaddish is that the 3 years of Orlo result in the next year being Kaddish. In other words, the 3 years of Orlo create the Chalais Kedusha. And that's the meaning of the words Kol Sheyeshlei Orlo, Yeshloi Ravai. Kol Shu Chayiv Ba'Orlo Yeshloi Ravai. Means it has Ravai. Orlo, 3 years of Isser, the next it creates Ravai. And that's why it doesn't say it's Chayiv Ravai, because it's not just a moshel. It's a din. That makes the Orlo. That makes the Chayiv. Oh. That's why he goes into Orlo here because this is it. This is it. This is the Orlo that makes the Ravai. In order to have Kedusha Ravai, you need the 3 years of Orlo. Precede it. The Halais Kedusha of Ravai is a result of Orlo. And that's why he comes over here and he says that this pasuk shows us that. Because why would we think it's different than Maaser-Sheni? You know why? Because this is an outgrowth of Isur, of something that I can't have. So there's reason to think that the Kedusha that it creates is also not for me. And on that, we need a special pasuk. You can't learn it from Maaser-Sheni. Because Maaser-Sheni is not an outgrowth of something that is the Isser creates the Kedusha. Here, the Isser creates the Kedusha. Okay. So if we say so, perhaps, we don't have to say that the Halacha Moshe Sinai creates a new Isser of Orlo. It's to go that far. Good. It's okay to go that far if you want, but you don't have to. Perhaps it create the focus of the Ram is Halacha Moshe Sinai Shevadei Orlo Chutz-Laaretz Surah of Tzveika Mutter is telling you no that this Isser Orlo of the Torah appears in Chutz-Laaretz in a weakened state. Allah is being mamshach that Isser in a weakened state. It's not the same type. It is Orlo of Eretz Yisroel without the power of the Orlo of Eretz Yisroel. Sveikamut. Sveikamut is a big statement. Any type of suffix. It is only Vaday Orlo and not suffix. So that's what the Rambam means. Amru Ella Orlo. We don't have proof that this Orlo can create the Kedushas and the Ravai. Since it's a new type of, since it's a weakened Orlo, it can't create a new din of Kedusha. Because only Orlo itself we know makes Kedusha, a complete Orlo. This is a watered down version of Orlo. That the Torah and the Torah was mamshech into Chutz-Laaretz. So a watered down version of Orlo is Orlo. So it's limited. It doesn't have that koyach to create an Isser, a Kedushas Ravai. So in other words, we don't have to come along and say that the Torah created a whole new halacha meshushin. It's a new type of Orlo in Chutz-Laaretz. It is the same Orlo with in a weakened state, in a totally weakened state. And that weakened state of Orlo, we cannot assume that yesh loy Ravai. An Orlo that doesn't have it's not potent enough to be chayiv. It only has to be a vaday, and that's it doesn't have that keich. That's what he says. Shlei amru ela. Same idea. Shlei amru ela. That's a possibility. It will answer also the same question why he doesn't, because he doesn't learn it from Maaser-Sheni. Again, his whole word is that it's not Maaser-Sheni. It says the halachas of Maaser-Sheni, but it's not Maaser-Sheni. And therefore Shvius still be chayav. Okay, that's the possibility. Anyway, sei gesund, stark, Chutz-Laaretz, be well.